Welcome back to Wires Up TV, people, where we're breaking down the Penrith game, where Penrith won 28-18. And look, it's deflating. Um, it's kind of reality check of the NRL of coming up against a Penrith team. And me talking about turning points, I still believe that the performance I saw from the Sharks does still, for me, mean that we're on the right track. But this is a great reality check into kind of being realistic about how we get there. How do we get to a premiership? How much is required to get there? So I think that's kind of a learning from this game. But let's break it down. Um, I want to first acknowledge Penrith. There's no wonder why they're four-time premiership winners. Even the depth they have, um, to produce that result that they did, speaks volumes for their system, their club, the players, the way they develop the players, the brand of football they play with. For me, they pretty much said, "Look, we believe we can break your middles down. We believe we've got enough experience there." And actually, if you look at it, they had Lindsay, Leota, Garner, Sorensen, Papali'i. If you actually look at the pieces, they're actually very good pieces. That if you're coming up against a younger pack, and look, we've been praising our young boys, but it's fair to say that they looked young today. Sorry, on Saturday. Coming up against the pieces you add in the Dimitrik and the Laban and Leka, they did. They're evenly matched, or even better at sometimes in terms of experience, tough, gritty, grinded out type players. I mean, their hooker, the name eludes me, but he's an absolute force to be reckoned with as well. Once you add all those pieces together, it's a legit forward pack, no matter which way you cut it up, even without the Yos and the Martins. And um, they're very, very good. And you got to give them credit for aiming up against our boys and dominating. And to be honest, probably, you know, making us reflect on our players and say, we love our players, we think highly of them. But when you're a little bit off the pace and you're not performing, it's no wonder that a team like Penrith can come in and dominate the middle of the field, and when they shouldn't be. But if you give them that and realistically say, "Hey, we need to be better. Yes, we've got talent, but if it doesn't work hard on the day, it's not going to get the result against someone that's going to work hard." So I got to give them a massive rep. Um, I think a massive rep to the outside backs. I think they outperformed us. You looked at the likes of Alamoti, Casey McLean, I thought was fantastic defensively, shut down a lot of things. Laurie was a workaholic. Jenkins, again, just doing the right things at the right time. Um, Blaze and Schneider didn't do a ton. They didn't have to do a ton. But when the moment called, they seized the moment and they pretty much counter-attacked or found openings when they were there. And I got to give them all the credit as well. And again, it goes back towards our former coach and Ivan. Ivan called a wonderful game, got everything bang on in terms of his rotations. Didn't lose much energy. Even when the team was down, they found a way to score points, similar to us in many ways. Is almost like mirroring our style of play or their style of play, whichever way you want to go. The whakapapa of Ivan to the Webby, whichever way you cut it up, the style of play definitely showed that their tough, gritty, grinded out style works as well, just against us, who is tough and gritty, grinded out from how we play. So I got to give them massive reps and acknowledge them firstly. Let's move now to our team, where look, it does look poorly upon us, and especially when I talk our boys up. To come out and give that type of performance is unacceptable. It's not a fair reflection, but when you do that, it allows other teams to see your weaknesses, that you are vulnerable and that you're lacking for consistency at times. That is something that we have to acknowledge and we have to fix. Just going through the game, and kind of I'll build a narration of what I kind of found as I was going through the game. But it started off, and I got to unfortunately mention MGT here. Probably his worst game in first grade. We think back for his performances against the Dolphins last year, I thought was fantastic. He's come in and done a job in many occasions, in most cases, a win. Today he got exposed, and I'm not going to give him the full brunt. Working with an edge like Dallin, and then Dallin comes off, and you got to work with Pompey. He haven't had much to build on, but still poor based on pure basics. I thought he dropped the ball early on. The tap back from Pompey, he couldn't recover that, which was quite simple. Got burnt by Casey McLean going too early on the legs, or not being clinical enough. You probably say in that situation, Rocco Berry wraps up a Casey McLean. A lot of defensive reads, poor communication between him and Dallin when Dallin was injured. I thought Casey should have come in. MGT should have come in. So very poor game from him. But yeah, just starting that game off, going back to how the game went, they came out with venom, Penrith, and that ruck and play the ball speed, we couldn't keep up with it. They kept attacking behind the ruck, finding different people at the A market, and just being just tough and gritty, and realizing we can get at the Warriors. They found their spaces, they found their ruck speed, and then likewise defensively aimed up and shut down most of our work. Although, to our credit, we were able to fight back a bit of that. I thought there was some, again, throughout this game, dumb penalties. CHT gave one, which marginal, but it's the NRL. It's soft as these days. There was the penalty for not markers, not square for forward. It's just one of those games reminding me of a 2024 when we're about to build momentum or get in the grind and we release the valve. It actually reminds me a lot like that, when we released the valve of pressure that we want to try and build. So discipline was one thing. There was a slip by Lecker. Lecker slipped over, and then I think Schneider went through, and they kind of got a line break. I don't think they scored from it, but again, it just showed just a lack of detail, probably coming off the bye. Not much, just wasn't, the intensity wasn't there. You could tell the boys were flustered in that first 20. They couldn't find their feet. But it did start to settle down a bit. We found ourselves on the scoreboard, I think, and we kind of got into an even game for the majority. There were some moments, I think, for me, to point out the halves in terms of poor moments. There was definitely a few. I thought Metcalf had opportunities to kick and goal. There was one off the scrum base where I thought he could have given it to MGT, who might have gone through. I understand that building pressure over time does break down teams, but there were some moments where if it's on, let it happen. Let it happen. There was one where I thought he went left on the fifth, and he could have put a kick in behind, turned it back inside, kicked it towards Dane Laurie, and then it fell dead. It's just so fifth tackle detail, I think, was poor from both halves. Chanel had one where he kicked it for a 7 tackle set as well. Nothing was on. It was clear that the defensive numbers were already there. So I put a lot of that on the halves, that they didn't quite deliver, and that's fair enough of them. Again, they're going back to the try that Sorensen scores before half time. Dallin was injured. Metcalf kicks it down, and there was no comms or detail around how to defend that situation. Look, it's tough when someone goes down and it's during play, but is there a way that they don't make that line break straight away, even though Dell's down? And then the try, why does Dell come into center when he's the most injured? Shouldn't he be hanging out on the wing? Or, there's even suggestions from my man Tater. Go subscribe to the bro Taylor. Healy season on TikTok mentioned, could you send C and K to the wing and roll RTS if they move left? If they're moving to our right side defense, could you roll C and K out there and pull RTS as fullback? So you kind of do a two-man fullback role depending on which side of the field. So it's just a calamity of errors. And a lack of awareness and communication, all those fronts, which were massive. Going into the second half, again, it starts off dicey. Alamoti puts that area of the field they targeted between RTS and CNK, just massive comms issues. When Dallin came off, got to acknowledge Tamaiti coming on, but him being at centre, I'll call it now and just say it wasn't the right call. It didn't work. And I know Tamaiti is being used as a utility, but he definitely isn't a centre. He definitely isn't that. Maybe they could have moved him into the halves, or maybe they could have moved him to fullback or something different. I understand. For me, I got to give a massive rep to CNK. I thought he was probably best on field with what he was able to do. Likewise, RTS. I think just their individual. I made an assumption that maybe individually because they had, I think their renowned individual preparation is very solid. That's why they shun in this game, and everyone else looked flat. But again, I just think that Tamaiti isn't good in that place. There were times Alamoti burnt him, or he fell on his feet. He couldn't quite move laterally enough to deal with Alamoti. And then that near try at the start was just not a great sign, wasn't it? That things were going to improve. Then you get to about the 45-minute mark, and Licker drops the ball over line. Again, that was a moment where we released the pressure we were about to go over. We get the ball back, fortunately, and then Laban we get over the line. That was a great try. I thought Laban was really good in moments. You can tell he's got an attacking prowess, the size of him. His cutback lines were fantastic. But that try for me summed up that if we built patiently on the line, that we could get them. But there were too many missed opportunities there. Then again, the momentum swung again, and CNK dropped the bomb. Then Penrith started to really pepper our goal line and just pretty much say, "We're going to break you down through the middle. We believe we can," and they did. And then I think they get the try as well. I might not have been at that moment, but there were some moments where we just fell. I felt like we weren't attacking. We were going through our sets, but not actually attacking. Do you know what I mean? So I know I'm countering myself by saying, "Oh, well, let the openings unfold by breaking them down." But there were some moments where you're thinking, "Man, I wish the halves just were on the ball a little bit more, trying things, or really trying to kind of get on the ball." And I suppose that's the model of Webby's game. It's a very let's grind the team out. And I suppose once we get into that pattern, it's hard to break from that. But there were some moments where we kind of got close to the goal line. I thought, man, just a little kick in behind here or something different. Use the width of the ball a little bit more. But it wasn't to be. Then the Penrith recovered the goal line dropout. That was another one where again just things weren't going our way and we weren't clinical enough to deal with a lot of things. Then the Jenkins intercept, which led to the try, I think, for Sorensen, or at the time, one of me, Blaze Talangi. But I was thinking MGT passed it and knew Jenkins in the first half was going to go for the intercept in the 2-on-1 situation. Then CNK pretty much gives him the ball with the 2-on-1 situation. I'm thinking you boys should be a bit more aware that Jenkins is going to play for the intercept, hold the ball through the line and offload post Jenkins. But that was just poor. And then, I think Blaze Talangi went over. But you could see on the inside, it wasn't so much the edges. It was the middle was a shot. Laban had done a recovering tackle and he was in the middle and he just had lost his feet. So it was guys that were tired. And sorry, I forgot to mention, but going back to the Marata HIA, that had a massive impact on the rotations. Webby had to push a few guys longer. The rotation for Egan coming off with Tamaiti in the middle, there was none of that. They couldn't do it. Plus Dallin getting injured, it pretty much neutralized what we could do with the bench impact. There just wasn't much. And again, adding to when you put the players in that situation where you got no bench cover, you're missing another middle coming on, then the likes of Tennis Style Smith starts to put more pressure on them to be either creative or more workload. Dimitri has to do more work. Leke, you can't afford to take him off. Laban, you can't afford to take him off. And so you just kind of neutralize our impact because of that. That's where you argue, does Tamaiti worth holding on the bench? Well, then the other argument, when you lose an outside back, what do you do then? So it's a catch-22 with the whole Tamaiti situation. I think personally, that was a game where it would have been great to have a Dylan Walker go out into the centres and do a job out there, or vice versa. He comes into the middle, plays a ball playing lock role. That's where you do miss a Dylan Walker type player, which I don't think the club has truly resolved yet. Obviously, they're using Tamati in that sense, but horses for courses type thing. Just if you look 2020 hindsight is fantastic in that situation. Yeah, sure, but that's something to think about. Then yeah, I think the Talangi try for me was like the end of the game really, and then it kind of got Penrith picked up again. Alamoti scores again. That there was signs earlier that he was going to score from that situation. RTS and CNK and Tamati didn't do enough to block out and prevent that for CNK, and Alamoti capitalizes on it, and that's game over at that point. I love CNK, but there were two massive drop bombs, communication, whatever way you want to cut it up, they weren't dealt with. And then the forward penalty at the end to take them to 28 points. That was icing on the cake. That was a frustration moment, and that was the end of the game. Look, it's massively frustrating. You want to carry on the momentum. You want to prove that you are a top 4 side and that you want to have a genuine shot. But to have these types of games is a reminder that you cannot take anything for granted. I definitely think the boys came out flat. I don't think they were quite ready for it. The Marata situation compounded things, obviously. And then when Dallin went off, it pretty much Webby had to play with his cards. Could he have changed to CNK and Martin? CNK was on a tear. He gambled with Martin, which didn't do much. And he pretty much, I think he had no other options. That's because of accrediting a massive Penrith team doing what they did. So what does that say about us? Look, there are some gaps once you start to go down in depth. We are missing Barnett. I think the youth are doing fantastic. What I saw from Laban was great. Dimitrik had some great touches game ball playing, but Leka, had a poor game. But now the weight's starting to sit on them. The weight of responsibility. They have to start to be creative, and that can be quite heavy when you're missing experienced players. Especially Capewell, I thought was a massive loss. I could definitely have seen Capewell coming into centre and doing a good job there, and just being that what he is, the player that he's been. So we did miss that. But that's to say also that the depth, just that rung below, still needs work on us. We still need the experience. We're still missing pieces to get us over the line against a team who I think was probably one of the better defensive teams we've come up against. And there's still those gaps, against certain teams that can defend our play. That we are lacking a little bit. We are. And in saying that, the majority of the comp, I think we can get it. We can, there's definitely, it's not impossible. I don't think this is a reflection of us being really bad. I think there are other teams in the comp that they just aren't as defensively good as Penrith. And so, in that sense, you're thinking Penrith are going to be legit once it comes around finals time. I have no doubt they will. But it also speaks to us needing a bit more work as well. So, highly frustrating. I totally get people's being upset. I mean, I'm not going to bag the team. I'm not going to flip-flop from what I believe. And I do think the team is in a genuine window in these next few years. And I still believe we can have a shot this year. But it shows you that there's a lot to work on the rest of the season. But we move, and I expect a massive performance against the Broncos this week. I expect the team to resolve their issues. If they were flat and they know it amongst themselves, they took the bye a bit too casually, or Webby gave them too much time off, and they've come back flat, then sort it out. Get yourself in order. But now with Dallin out, Metcalf could be out. Do you pull the pin and give Metcalf some rest and get Tanner Boyd in? Does Tane come back in? Or who, what do you start to do now? This is the tricky part of the season that, yes, we've got some more lighter weight teams after the Broncos and after their last bye, but it's still tough to grind out wins at this stage in the NRL. We've seen that under Webby in 23. It was tough to close that season out, even though we finished top 4. your body starts to break down, the mental fragility, the tiredness, the demand on the players. So it's going to be a massive run here, but I still believe that we're in the right place where we are. It's actually good to have a loss like that, to truly reflect what we need to work on, where we're at as a club. I don't think for every game plan or every kind of crisis that we're in that we have the answers. Um, that game was well in the balance until about the 65th minute. And then once it slipped out, there was no late comeback, I don't believe. We hadn't shown enough for that. So, again, that kind of shows that, we need to work on our plan B. We need to work on, again, the being consistent in the Webby's model that for the majority works, and that we need to continue to help work. So it's a tough one, but we move. We set up for the Broncos now. When we reflect on the season, we might look back at this moment and say, oh, that was a turning point. We might say, oh, that was the moment we knew that this team wasn't quite there yet. But in my opinion, I don't hold that loss as massive. Once you weigh it up in context, I still hold into the fact that we should finish top 4 and we should have a good run, but there's a lot of work to do. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching this review of the game. Please give us a like and subscribe. We're not far away from 3,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and we look forward to reaching heaps more milestones here on Wise Up TV. But thank you once again. Like, share, and subscribe. We'll catch you later. Peace.